The early church was on fire, not literally but metaphorically. The Spirit of God came as promised by the Lord. Thousands had believed in a single day, and something was happening in Jerusalem that had never happened before in human history. People were selling their possessions and laying the money at the apostles' feet. Not because they were told to, not because there was a law, because the love of God had so overwhelmed them that holding on to things felt impossible. Barnabas sold a field, handed over every coin, no conditions, no contracts, no credit, just surrender. And the community watched, and they were moved, and Barnabas' action was recognized. That is the world Ananias and Sapphira were living in, a world of radical generosity, visible sacrifice, and public recognition. And somewhere in that beautiful, spirit-filled atmosphere, something went quietly wrong. Not with a shout, not with open rebellion, with a whisper, a private conversation between a husband and a wife, a decision made in the dark that would be presented in the light. They sold land too. That part was real. The transaction happened. The money existed. But when they counted it out, something shifted. They looked at the full amount, and they felt it, the pull, the gap between what they were willing to give and what they wanted people to think they were giving. So they kept some back, secretly, and then they walked into the presence of the apostles and laid the rest down as if it were everything, as if the partial were the whole, as if the edited version of their obedience were the full story. Peter looked at Ananias and said something that should stop every one of us cold. He said, "Why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit? Not lie to us, not lie to the church, lie to the Holy Spirit." Because God was not a spectator in that room. He was present. He knew the land had sold. He knew what the full price was. He knew the number they were hiding. And Ananias fell down dead. 3 hours later, Sapphira came in, unaware. Peter asked her the same question. "Is this the price you sold the land for?" And she said yes. Same lie, same debt. Now I need to say something clearly, because this story is often misread. This was not primarily about money. Peter himself said the land was theirs to keep. The money was theirs to do with as they chose. The sin was not in withholding a portion. The sin was in the performance. It was in the presentation of a false self before God and the community. It was in wanting the honor of full sacrifice while only paying the cost of partial surrender. They wanted to be seen as people they had not yet become, and that is a temptation that did not die with Ananias and Sapphira. It lives in every generation. It lives in us. Here is how deception enters the life of a believer, not through a dramatic fall, not through some obvious moment of rebellion where you cross a clear line and everyone sees it. It enters softly. It enters through the gap between who you are in public and who you are in private. It enters when you begin curating your spiritual image rather than cultivating your spiritual life. It enters when your prayer is performed for an audience rather than breathed from a broken place, when your giving is calculated for visibility rather than flowing from love, when your testimony is shaped to impress rather than offered to serve, when you post the highlight and protect the wound, when you show up to church carrying a version of yourself that has been carefully edited to remove the parts you are ashamed of. That is not integrity, that is management. And the terrifying thing about spiritual image management is that it feels so reasonable. You tell yourself you are protecting people from unnecessary information. You tell yourself everyone presents their best self. You tell yourself God knows your heart anyway, so it does not matter what the surface looks like, but the surface is where you live. The surface is what shapes your relationships, your community, your witness. And when you build a spiritual life on a managed image, you do not get peace. You get exhaustion. You get the constant weight of maintaining something that is not real. You get further and further from the person God is actually calling you to be, because you are too busy defending the person you have convinced others you already are. Peter did not ask Ananias for a better offering. He asked him why. Why did you let this happen? Why did you let the enemy into this? Because that is the real question underneath every hidden compromise. Why did you choose the approval of people over the presence of God? Why did you decide that being perceived as devoted was more valuable than actually being transformed? And here is where this gets personal. Because most of us will never sell land and lie about the price, but every one of us has stood in the gap between who we really are and who we want people to think we are. Every one of us has made a presentation, crafted a version, held something back, and called it wisdom, or privacy, or humility, when really it was fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being known fully and loved less because of it. But that fear is a trap, because the God you are performing for already knows everything. He knew Ananias before Ananias walked through the door. He knows you before you open your mouth, before you compose the post, before you walk into the building. And he is not asking for your best presentation. He is asking for your actual self, the unedited, unpolished, still in process, sometimes failing, genuinely reaching version of you, because that is the only version he can actually work with. Transformation does not happen at the surface. It happens in the places you are willing to bring into the light, the wound you are willing to name, the compromise you are willing to confess, the gap you are willing to close, not by improving your image, but by surrendering the image entirely and standing honestly before God and before the people he has placed in your life. The early church was powerful not because everyone in it was perfect. It was powerful because the Spirit of God was genuinely present, and genuine presence requires genuine people. You cannot have the fullness of God in a space filled with managed versions of His children. So let this be the moment, not a moment of condemnation, because that is not what this is. This is an invitation to stop performing and start surrendering, to lay down not just the offering, but the need to be seen giving it, to come before God as you actually are, and trust that who you actually are is exactly who He came to meet.